Extensive consultation was undertaken in relation to the minimum wage review, and I am satisfied that that consultation was sufficient enough for a rational, reasonable and fair decision on the minimum wage to be made.
Question number 9, Chester Borrow. Oh, I beg your pardon. Jackie Blue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister of Labour. Has the Minister seen any reports regarding the minimum wage?
The Honourable Kate Wilkinson.
Mr Speaker, yes. I've seen a report from Trevor Mallard hinting the opposition wants a raise of $15 to $15. I've seen a report from Phil Goff demanding a raise to $13. I've also seen the opposition's election manifesto that promotes an increase to $12.65. So perhaps, Mr Speaker, the opposition should sit down and work out who is actually in charge of their decisions.
Question number, I beg your pardon, Hone Harawira.
To the Minister, what steps will the government introduce to meet the Māori Party call that the minimum wage be increased to $15 an hour, and when will this be achieved?
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Kate Wilkinson.
As in the calculation and the review of a minimum wage, all economic conditions at the time are taken into account. We are informed and advised that to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour may result in the loss of up to 17,000 jobs, and our priority is job protection.
Question number 9, Chester Borrows.
Mr Speaker.
Chester Borrows.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Justice and asks, what steps is the government taking before the next general election to improve the law governing campaign finance?
Speaker.
Honourable Simon Power.
Mr Speaker, later this week I will bring a bill to the House that seeks to repeal the Electoral Finance Act 2007. Mr Speaker, it will be replaced with an interim regime that largely reverts back to the previous law, except for the rules surrounding donations and the penalties structure. The government has committed to pass this legislation in its first 100 days. It's then my intention on behalf of the government to embark on a wide-ranging consultative series of meetings and other consultation to form a more enduring reform of electoral finance law that will be in place for the 2011 general election.
Chester Borrows.
What consultation has he undertaken on these proposals?
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Simon Power.
Mr Speaker, the repeal of the Electoral Finance Act was clearly signalled to the public as a priority for the incoming government, and last week I wrote to the leaders of those parties or their representatives in the justice area who are not represented in the government to offer to meet with them to discuss this legislation. I'm pleased to say that to date very many of those parties have accepted that invitation.
Chester Borrows.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, has he received any feedback on the government's proposed approach to electoral finance reform?
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Simon Power.
Yes, I have taken the opportunity to speak with the Leader of the Opposition, who has indicated that he is interested in engaging in the process. Incidentally, I've also read a press release by the PSA, which welcomes the government's decision to repeal the Electoral Finance Act.
Question number 10, the Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
The Minister of Justice and ask.
I beg the members' pardon. Could I ask members to please, if they're going to call, please do so promptly following the previous question. John Biscow.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Why does the Minister propose to carry through the donation provisions in the Electoral Finance Act when most of these were introduced after public submissions, both written and oral, had closed and the public had been denied a chance to comment on them?
Honourable Simon Power.
Mr Speaker, transparency is an important part of enduring electoral law.
We now come to question number 10 in the name of the Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Justice and asks what reports, if any, has he received on funding for community law centres?
The Honourable Simon Power.
Mr Speaker, I have received 2 reports from the Legal Services Agency and 2 reports from the Ministry of Justice outlining a significant drop in funding available for community law centres. As the member will know, community law centres receive their funding from interest earned on solicitors' nominated trust accounts. Because of the cooling housing market and falling interest rates, I'm advised that community law centres have been informed by the Legal Services Agency that their funding could drop by an initial estimate of up to 43.9% in some cases in the 09-10 financial year.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister agree in principle with the proposal for government to provide alternative funding for community law centres to ensure that they do not need to drastically cut services at a time when demand for those services will inevitably increase, and if not, why not?
Mr. Speaker.
Simon Power.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member I'm taking this matter extremely seriously. This government is committed to access to justice for all, not just those privileged few who can afford to access such redress as that offered by, for example, the Supreme Court. Coincidentally, the drop in community law centres funding is roughly equivalent to about $4.3 million, which was committed by the previous government to the bronze plating at the new Supreme Court.
Shane Arden.
Supplementary to the Minister of Justice. Why is the drop in funding occurring?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Simon Power.
Mr. Speaker, community law centres are funded primarily through revenue from the Lawyers and Conveyancers Special Fund. The fund consists of 60% of interest earned on solicitors' nominated trust accounts. As I said earlier, the recent housing cooling market is reducing the funding availability. This matter requires the government's attention, and that is what it's receiving. I can advise the House that this issue is forming part of my discussions and part of budget considerations.
The Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Are aware that the Ministry of Justice deferred its planned review of services and funding arrangements of community law centres in 2006 due to the then high level of the special fund. Yes, it was under the previous government, and also the stability of the special fund. Circumstances have changed, and we've just heard that it is the interest generated from the special fund that is the source of the funding. So it isn't unreasonable to ask the Minister, when did he instruct the Ministry of Justice to commence that review in light of the report of the Legal Services Agency?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Simon Power.
When this matter was brought to my attention, actually just prior to the new government being sworn in, it was one of the first things I raised with officials upon taking the warrant of Minister of Justice. Since that time, as well as receiving those reports, I can advise the member that I'll be meeting with the Coalition of Community Law Centres on 19 February. Kevin Campbell will be leading that delegation, as I understand it. As I said, I take this matter seriously. It will be forming part of my budget deliberations and considerations with the Minister of Finance.
Rahui Katane.
To the Minister, what actions will the government take to review the actual percentage of interest earned on solicitors' nominated trust accounts retained by the banks in order to support those most in need of gaining access to justice and being able to continue to benefit from the services of community law centres?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Simon Power.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can advise the member that the very matter she raises is currently forming part of my deliberations as I work towards what I hope will be a solution that meets at least some of the expectations of most parties.
Question number 11, Nikki Wagner.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of the Environment. What progress has the government made in meeting the confidence and supply agreement that National and Act agree to promote investment, jobs, wages, employment and prosperity, as well as environmental improvement by amendments to the Resource Management Act?
The Honourable Nick Smith.
We've made good progress with the first phase